What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the reviews that took me the longest, specifically the reviews after 100% that took me the longest, which, as you might imagine, reviewing games after 100% is a rather time-consuming endeavor. It's not that uncommon for games to take hundreds of hours to see and do everything for, especially when you're taking into account more than just the achievements, as oftentimes seeing various things in a game that aren't tied to the achievements can take even longer. That said, I've been doing this for quite some time, actually, a couple years now. That is to say, reviewing games that way. And I did a similar video to this about a year and a half ago, but as you might imagine, a lot has changed since then. For starters, the amount of games I've reviewed. That list has actually changed a good bit, which is of course what we're about to dive into, though I do want to start this video off with a couple of honorable mentions. There are two games that took me several hundred hours, but in the case of one of them, I never actually reviewed the title, and then in the case of the other, I don't remember how long the 100% took me because I played it a lot afterwards. So the first one being Divinity Original Sin 2. This is a game I covered a lot when the channel was first starting to find its legs, if you will. The thing I covered the most was Divinity lore. So naturally, I played that game a ton and I 100%ed along the way, but that was before I was really doing these reviews. And while I have like 500 hours in it now, I couldn't tell you how much of that was actually trying to do that. So who's to say? But I've played it for about 500. And then there is The Witcher 3. I've just never reviewed this title, but 100%ing it took me about 350 hours. Love it to death, made a few builds for it. However, the Witcher franchise is hardly hurting for reviews, but I guess if people really want me to, I'll go ahead and review it, but I'm honestly not in much of a hurry to do so. But with the honorable mentions out of the way, let's dive into this thing. So, starting with number 5, we actually have Elden Ring. Elden Ring released earlier this year at the end of February, start of March, and as I'm sure many people are aware, it is quite a large game, with multiple endings, and with only really one save file, per character I mean. It takes some work to 100% the thing. That said though, this is probably the easiest of From Software's games to 100%, and even then it still took me like 130-ish hours. And while I'm not a die-hard Souls-like fan, I did nonetheless really enjoy Elden Ring. I had a lot of fun with my time with it, and outside of a few complaints, overall it was a fantastic experience. That, again, took me quite a while to wrap up. And that brings us to fourth from the bottom, and this is actually Troubleshooter Abandoned Children. This was a relatively recent review, though the game itself came out, I want to say, a year or two ago, and the 100% took me about 160 hours. It is a large game. It's a tactical RPG, which is to say tactical turn-based combat, typically objective-based, and it has a surprisingly large amount of content for an indie title. The story took me about 100 hours. It was, of course, another 60 doing pretty much everything else, grinding things out. There's a really fantastic amount of customization and things available, and it's a game you can get a ton out of, even a lot more than 160 hours, because it actually also has a multiplayer mode where you can play co-op or PvP, not unlike Elden Ring in that sense. That has given it a lot of legs outside of the single player. Very deep game, and as such, it took me quite a long time to 100% it. But obviously, not as long as some of these other titles, which brings us to number 3, Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. This one took me about 174 hours. Mostly time well spent. I enjoyed this one quite a bit. Fun fact, the review that I did for this game is actually the most watched video on this channel, so I think it's safe to say that it was worth the time investment. But Deadfire has an incredibly short main story. However, there are a ton of side activities you can do, side quests to undertake, DLCs to work through, and combine this with the fact that I love the Pillars of Eternity universe, which will hopefully be knowledge that will serve me well for the upcoming Avowed release whenever that happens to be. But because I love that world so much, I spent a lot of time doing everything that I possibly could, and as such, I spent a lot more time with Deadfire than I really intended to, which I think helped out the review quite a bit. But that said, it is one of my earlier reviews, and the quality isn't as amazing as today's stuff, where I have a bit more equipment and knowledge under my belt, but nonetheless, it's a review I'm proud of. I had a lot of fun with that game, and naturally, it's one of my favorites. But that brings us to number 2 on the list, and this one I think might actually surprise people because it is Red Dead Redemption 2. This one took me about 230 hours. Now, some people, especially my regulars, might be unaware that I even reviewed Red Dead Redemption 2, but I did, and it was one of my very first reviews after 100%. Definitely not my best work, to be honest, but I did enjoy the game quite a bit, which is saying something because it's not exactly my normal type of game, if you will. Tend to specialize in CRPGs and TRPGs, if you couldn't tell by now. But that said, Red Dead Redemption 2 was amazing. I really loved it, and I decided to review it because I spent so much time with it and I had so much fun that I wanted to talk about it, including some of the pain points. That said, though, I freely admit the review isn't that great, but we've all got to start somewhere, and it was one of the stepping stones that led me here. And with any luck, the reviews I do these days will be stepping stones to where I go in the future. But that, of course, brings us to the number one spot. And in a surprise to no one who watches this channel regularly, it is Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. My total time spent with this game is around 750 hours. I played it during beta, did a bunch of videos on it there, used that knowledge to help me out with the actual review copy that I got, which was another 80. And then since then, I've spent about 550 hours with the full retail version. And believe it or not, I needed just about every minute of that time to actually see everything that Wrath of the Righteous has to offer. The most time-consuming thing about this, and what makes up most of that time spent actually, was seeing all of the mythic path options, as they do change up the game pretty significantly, so naturally I wanted to see all of the options. It did give me quite the appreciation for just the sheer amount of options available, which is one of the many reasons Wrath of the Righteous is my favorite game, really. Somewhat comically, this is a number that will continue to go up because they are still releasing DLC for it, which means I go back and play through DLC and do reviews on those, which adds even more time to it, and I would not be surprised if my total time for this game, including beta and everything, winds up being well over 1,000 hours. But that's all I've got for you guys. The reviews that took me the longest, definitely a few in there that I spent several hundred hours on, though some people might have been surprised to learn that most reviews actually take me less than that. Usually 40 to 80 is about average for any given game, and some are even shorter. But nonetheless, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. November is going to be a big month for the channel. A lot of games coming out, a lot of stuff to review. But regardless of all that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.